Hi class, now let's talk about going from rectangular coordinates to polar coordinates. So this is a little less straightforward, though it's not too bad, than going from polar to rectangular coordinates. So this video might be a little longer. I have 4 examples to show you guys. And there are three steps here. So the first step is I want to plot the point in rectangular coordinates so you know what quadrant your point is in. You don't maybe on your show work necessarily have to show yourself like meticulously plotting that point every time, as long as you're able to tell me what quadrant that point is in, because that is going to help you here in step 3. So step 2, you're going to find R. So R, you're going to use your formula that we had a couple of slides ago, where R is the square root of x squared plus y squared. So you're going to be given x and y is in your point in rectangular coordinates, so you just plug those in to your formula for R. Note that if x is 0 or y is 0, R can be easily found by looking at the graph that you did in step 1 if you plotted your point. So now for step 3, we're going to find theta. So this is why we need to know what quadrant you're in. So for theta, we need to use inverse tangent. So we're going to be given x and y, and we're going to be using the fact that theta is going to be equal to tangent inverse of y over x. But that depends on what quadrant you're in. So for quadrant 1 and 4, that works just fine because that's where tangent is going to be positive. But if you are in your point lies in quadrant 2 or 3, then you're going to have to use the formula pi minus tangent inverse of y over x to get yourself in the right quadrant. Okay? So let's practice that just a little bit. So here I want to start with part A, and I'm going to convert these rectangular coordinates to polar coordinates. So my first coordinate here is A is -1 square root of 3. So the first thing is I'm going to quickly plot this point. Again, I know that this is going to be in quadrant 2 because I know that my x is negative and my y is positive. All right, but just to be meticulous here, my x is going to be -1 and my y is like the square root of 3, so it's going to be somewhere right there. So this is going to be in quadrant 2. So the second step after graphing your point is to find R. So remember from our formula, R is equal to the square root of x squared. So that for us in this example is -1 squared plus y squared. So that is the square root of 3 squared. Okay, so here I get the square root of 1 plus 3, which is going to end up being 2. So my R is 2. So that was pretty straightforward. So now let's find my angle theta. So looking at the fact that we're in quadrant 2, I need the second formula here for theta. So theta is pi minus tangent inverse of x over y. And what happens here is, unfortunately, your calculator is going to give you an answer in the wrong quadrant. So this will ensure that you get the answer in quadrant 2 or 3. Okay, if your calculator is probably going to give you something in a positive quadrant. All right, so pi minus tangent inverse of y over x, so that is root 3 over -1. All right. Alright, so we get theta equals pi minus tangent inverse of negative root 3. I know I have it written a little bit weird there. So I am going to pull up a table of values from 3.1, which has some inverse trig for us for tangent. So notice if we use this table, unfortunately if we use the negative root 3, we're going to get a negative angle, and that's not going to be very helpful to us in this situation. So, because we need a quadrant 2 angle, because we were told that this, we found that this angle is in quadrant 2. Well, notice that tangent inverse is positive root 3 in quadrant 1 at pi thirds, okay? So, let's go ahead and use pi thirds, and then use our formula here, pi minus pi thirds, and that will give us the correct angle that we need. Okay, so we get pi minus pi over 3, all right, and we get 2 pi over 3, and that is my angle in quadrant 2. So now what we need to do is just put this together as a point. So now our point P is going to be R, which comes first, which you said was positive 2, and then theta 2 pi over 3. All right, so that is the answer that I want right there. All right. So now let's try the next example here. Let me make a delineation. So now I want to try B, where my first x-coordinate is square root of 3 and my y-coordinate is 1. So the first step is to plot my point. So square root of 3 positive 1 is square in the middle of quadrant 1. So this is going to be a positive angle. Alright, so that's positive x value, positive root 3, and positive 1 for my y. So we are in quadrant 1. Alright, so now I'm going to find R. So R is going to be the same as it was for part B. Alright, so root 3 squared. I just changed the order a little bit. So that's root 3 squared, now plus 1 squared, and that equals root 4, which is 2. So now I'm going to use the same trick where theta equals an inverse tangent function, but now I don't have to worry about being in quadrant 2 or 3, so I can just use my basic trig functions here. So theta is going to equal tangent inverse y over x, so that's going to be 1 over root 3, which is also root 3 over 3. Again, I'm going to bring up that formula, that table of values rather, and it looks like tangent of theta is root 3 over 3 at pi over 6 in quadrant 1. Alright, so this is pi over 6. So now my point is 2 pi over 6. Alright, so I have one more page just to kind of get used to all of the different trig values here, and then this is going to, you'll have one more quick check for this section. Alright, so now example, converting from rectangular to polar coordinates continued. So now I have x equals -2 and y is 0. So the point -2, 0. Again, sometimes it is helpful to plot your points, even if you already know what coordinate you're in, or quadrant you're in rather. So -2, 0 is going to be on the negative horizontal axis right there. We'll make it red. Alright. So we know that R is going to be 2 units out from your origin, so that's going to be, we're going to let R equal 2. All right, so now let's try to find our angle. So notice that my point here is a quadrantal angle, which is going to be pi. All right, and you can find this just by looking at the graph and comparing it to your unit circle, or tangent inverse of y over x, so 0 over -2, which is 0. Well, tangent inverse of 0 is going to be 0 at 0 degrees and pi degrees, but we're in quadrant 2 here, or just right at the border there of quadrant 2, so we have to pick pi degrees. Let me write that more correctly there. So it's just pi in quadrant 2. All right. So our point there for part C is going to be 2 and pi. All right, so let's do one more example. Example D. So now for example D, we have x being negative and y being positive. So this means that we are now in still in quadrant 2. So we happen to really like quadrant 2 in these examples. But let's see what happens with example D. So we have x is -3 and y is 3, which means I am in quadrant 2. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. All right. So I need to first find r, which is the square root of -3 squared plus 3 squared. All right. Leave myself some room here. All right, which is the square root of 18, which simplifies to 3 root 2. So that is r. All right, so now we need to find tangent inverse. All right, we need to use our inverse tangent so we can find theta. So we have, since we are in quadrant 2, we need to use theta equals pi minus tangent inverse of y over x. All right, so to simplify that a little bit, I get pi minus tangent inverse of -3 over 3, so pi minus tangent inverse of -1. So this sounds like a value that is in my trig table here. So pi tangent inverse is equal to -1 at -pi over 4. Again, unfortunately, this is a negative angle here. We don't want a negative angle. So let's use our quadrant 1 angle of pi over 4 and plug that into this formula. So theta equals pi minus pi over 4. And that is going to give us 3 pi over 4, which again is going to land us right nicely in the middle of quadrant 2, like right in between, right in the middle of quadrant 2, which we should expect based on our graph here. All right, so to put that together, my point P is going to equal 3 root 2, 3 pi over 4. Okay, and that's my answer for D. And let me go ahead and box my answer for C. All right, that should get you going. You have a wonderful day, and let me know if you have any questions.